Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hello, welcome all to the MIT Social Entrepreneurship Alumni Group event, conversation about effective impact measurements with Sasha Dichter from 60 Decibels. I'm here with Sasha, co-founder of 60 Decibels, which is a company that measures impact by listening to the customers directly. I am Vera. I am VP of Programming here at MIT SEEK, and I will be hosting today's session together with our founder, Sayuri Sharper. Before we get started, I want to say a couple of words about MIT SEEK. So we are an organization organized under the MIT Alumni Association. Our mission is to bring together MIT alumni and like-minded people to co-create a better world through social entrepreneurship and impact investing. Now, terminology here is important. So what do we mean with social entrepreneurship? Any organization that addresses a basic unmet need or solves a social or environmental problem through a market-driven approach. And what do we mean with impact investing? Investments that are made in companies or organizations with the intent to contribute measurable, and we'll get to that in the session, positive social or environmental impact alongside a financial return. If you're not yet part of our group, you can join us in our online community at mit-seek.mn.co, and I will put that link in the chat, where in our online community, we connect with each other, we share resources, and we post information about events just like this one. Now, before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. We have disabled the chat to keep our session focused, but we do want this to be a very engaging conversation. So please post all questions for Sasha in the Q&A section. We will try to get to as many of the questions as we can. And with that, let's get started. Hello, Sasha, so great to have you. Could you get us started with just telling us the origin story of how 60 Decibels came about and how you got involved in impact investing?
Well, those are two very different questions, but
I know.
Well, why don't it's a pleasure to be here and thank you for having me, and looking forward to our conversation. I mean, how I got involved in impact investing is a much longer story involving my Brazilian mother and immigrant father, and spending my youth going from New York, where I grew up, to Rio and seeing economic disparities that were, I mean, if anyone's ever been to Rio, it really hits you in the face in a different way, in a visceral way, how the lottery of all of our births really is the major determinant of, as I remember in my grandmother's house, which side of the glass I would sit on. And I got to sit on the side of the glass that had a piano and a marble floor, literally looking out at one of the slums near Copacabana in Rio. And so I was forever looking for some sort of way that I could apply those gifts in a positive way. And very early on was very enamored of the notion of market-based approaches. I had actually done some public sector work that I found very discouraging and was hoping that there was a better way. The 60 Decibel story is a little shorter. So I spent 12 years at Acumen, which is an early stage impact investor that focuses historically primarily on the developing world. Acumen is an NGO, has helped create a lot of the foundational infrastructure for social impact measurement, and really cares and cared tremendously about how to make social impact measurement work for entrepreneurs. And I spent the last 7 years of my time at Acumen as the Chief Innovation Officer, and basically my job was to look for gaps in the market and see whether or not we could either partner to address them, or if we thought that we needed to build solutions to invest them. And so one of those areas was obviously impact measurement, where we had done a lot of work, and I'm happy to go into the details, but the sort of the bottom line of the story was, for all of the work we had done, we had built software, we had created standards, we had worked with partners like Google and Salesforce and the Gin and Iris and all of the players who cared about this. When we in 2012 looked hard at what we actually knew about the social impact being created by the more than 100 investments all over the world, it was limited at best. It essentially boiled down to the number of jobs created and the number of people served. And while those are excellent indicators of scale, and they're a starting point for the amount of time, effort, and resources we were putting behind social impact measurement, we knew that we weren't getting smarter about how to create the impact we were trying to create. And so we went back to the drawing board. I spent a year trying to figure out if I thought we could do better, because I think there are a lot of reasons to think you couldn't. But also had this conviction that if like we hadn't figured it out, that with the intent that we had, being a nonprofit and the resources that we had access to, then it felt like there was a really important gap in the marketplace. And so we started to build a solution to kind of solve our own problem. And over time, some of the funders of that work said the same thing. Well, as long as you're doing this, could you do it in our portfolio? And kind of one thing led to another, and we got to the point where it looked like we had a business on our hands and we needed to figure out what to do next.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Can we drill deeper a little into how do you measure impact? And I've heard you mention the customer-focused approach to measuring impact. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of my premises and our premises with 60 decibels and is that we've come at social impact measurement from the wrong direction. And I think we've actually made two mistakes. So I think the first mistake is thinking that this is an academic exercise performed by experts and studied in controlled environments, rather than saying, and again, I'm sorry, my context for most of what I'll talk about has to do with social impact that is created directly for people. So we do less work in the environment, for example, but there's a lot of people in the world who are working very hard to make their own lives better. So it's still a pretty big swath. So rather than say this is like science and this is like a controlled study, saying this is about people and their lives and their lived experience. So I think that's kind of wrong turn number one versus right turn. And then I think the second is we spent all of our time way at the top with kind of categories and definitions, rather than starting at the bottom and saying, what data could I get that would be useful? You know, so imagine, if you will, I mean, the analog that I always give for where we are in social impact measurement, I remember when I went to business school, and I was probably one of the last classes to get the physical blue book of all the accounting terms. I can't remember. We didn't actually use it. So I think that was the transition we were going through. But there was this, you know, it was like this thick little book, all the definitions of everything in accounting. That's what we've created in social impact measurement, the definitions. And it's as if we said, everyone has the book, go do accounting. But you know, there's no standards, there's no data quality, there's no anything else. But now that we've defined various terms, we're done. And obviously you could not run functional businesses if there weren't accounting professionals, accounting practices, accounting standards that allow us to do, you know, run businesses better. And so that's really where we are in social impact measurement, because we made it so complicated and like so wonky and so many frameworks and lenses and all these sorts of things. And again, what we have found, and I hope we can turn to again and again, is like, ultimately for us, there's people for whom social impact investments and social enterprises are trying to make a positive difference. And we firmly believe that if we can make it easy to hear from them in a way that's respectful to them and allows us to ask the right kinds of questions, we can learn what's going on in their lives. And isn't that the whole point? And can't we kind of skip all of those painful steps, or at least say that they need to be the outcome of what we do, rather than a starting point that's so overwhelming that it just scares everybody off?
Yeah, that makes sense. And can we, how do you measure impact? So you're not doing the top-down approach, like 10,000 metrics, but how do you measure impact?
So our, you know, again, from that premise of it needs to be customer-based, you know, I think we benefited a lot from facing a lot of constraints. So if you start again where we were with the Acumen portfolio or a lot of impact investments, you've got customers all over the world in very infrastructure poor environments. And so the main reason why people don't get good data is because it's too expensive. And I remember, you know, sitting there as we were thinking, like, is there a better way to do this? Just having a conversation with someone saying, like, I don't get this. Like, literally, these companies are selling to these people every day, but we're saying we can't get to these people. Like, someone's getting to these people. Like, it's not so complicated, right? And so we actually started down the path originally of saying, could we take advantage of the interactions that companies have with customers and use that as a data collection moment, which it turns out sounds really good and basically doesn't work for a number of reasons. But then we were also stumbled across one of the companies that Acumen invested in had a call center. And in addition to that, a group called the Grameen Foundation had created what was called the Poverty Probability Index. So it's basically a set of 10 questions that you could ask someone that were very objective. And from that, you could determine whether or not they were poor. Things like, what's your house made of? What education level do you have, et cetera. So what we had then was a call center that had relationships and trust with clients, and a set of questions that were very simple and objective, easy for anybody to answer, that would give us really, really rich data. So we just ran a test and said, could you run this PPI survey with your customers? And this company whose motto, it was an Indian ambulance company who's called Sakitsa, whose motto was access for all. And they didn't actually know if they were serving poor people. And suddenly 2 weeks later, 7 years into their history, they got the data back that said 65% of their customers lived below the poverty line. And there's like high fives in the halls. The founder and CEO was like, oh my God, we're actually doing it. Like all of this incredible stuff. And it was like really easy. And I think when you have, stories also always make sense when you're looking backwards. So it was sort of this moment of, we've been trying a bunch of stuff and it was like, wow, that really worked. Like, what did we just do? And what we just did was we said, everybody in the world, including the poorest people in the world, increasingly have access to a cell phone. And someone did a lot of good hard work to figure out what questions to ask. Let's keep doing that. And fundamentally, data is at the core of everything we do. So we call people on the phone. We've actually built our own network of more than 750 researchers in 50 countries. So imagine we have this global networked software connected call center, if you will, with people we recruit and we train, and they speak more than 125 different languages. They're all hooked up into our software. And then our work has been, okay, in addition to those PPI questions, which are awesome and we use, what are the questions you need to ask to take all the complexity in the world and boil it down to discernible, measurable social impact? And so that's really our jobs, to figure out how to do that. So our surveys are quite short, always fewer than 40 questions, sometimes as few as 20. We're really focused on the quality of the experience of the person we're talking to. We want to make it respectful. We want to strengthen the relationship they have with the company. And then the other thing I would add is we are intentionally mixing kind of pure social impact with other customer experience measurements. Because at the end of the day, and I can say this with more conviction now as an entrepreneur myself, like I need actionable things now. And it is often the case that one of the major impediments to social impact is a basic product or service delivery issue. Because you can imagine you're creating a new company, distribution is hard, after sales support is hard, et cetera. And so we want to know things like, is your quality of life better? Do you have more money to spend on your kids' education? But we also want to know, did the thing break? Are you a promoter of the company or not? How's the after sales support? When you have problems, are they resolved? And there's something we're finding about that mix that switches the entrepreneur from saying, like, why are you here? I have a business to run. Even a social entrepreneur, to this is great. I need to know more about my customers. And I do think that's kind of the last, if there was, I started with two things that I'm concerned about how we've framed social impact measurement. I think that's the third leg of that stool, is we've sort of created something that any entrepreneur worth her salt will try to make not happen within the confines of her company, because it just doesn't feel like, making the business work. And if we don't do it in a way that adds value every day to entrepreneurs, it's never going to get baked in. And it's just always going to be this tax on social businesses, which frankly have enough barriers as it is.
Right. Could you give me a little background on just on that topic? So who are some of your customers that commission you to run these studies?
So, we've definitely, having grown out of Acumen, we have gotten the largest section of our client base are obviously impact investors. So, after Acumen, we did a lot of work with the CDC group out of the UK, a lot of work with the network of Omidyar funds, so Flourish Ventures, Humanity United, Omidyar India, et cetera. Large family offices like Kenny Arth, debt investors like microfinance investors like Global Partnerships, Symbiotics, et cetera. And again, all of these, what we found they all kind of had in common was a very clear intent, either related to learning or related to social impact, and really kind of a high built up level of frustration with the tools that were available to them. And so we will, when we typically work with them, we will, in the best of all possible worlds, we'll actually have a solution for them that gets them measurement across their entire investment portfolio and gets them comparative results. And in many cases, that's actually the most useful thing. One of the things that we've learned is obviously because we do things that are remote, because our turnaround times for an entire, I don't even like to call them studies, but for lack of a better word, an engagement will be kind of 8 to 12 weeks. Obviously it's fast and it's more affordable. But the other thing that we learned is you can also simultaneously cover an entire portfolio. So we've done things like with the Omidyar Group, where we would cover 24 companies in 12 countries and 11 languages in their global education portfolio in 3 months.
Oh, wow.
And so, I mean, it was obviously a sprint for our team, but at the end of 3 months, not only do they have really the kind of impact data they've never had, but they have a comparative snapshot of the end customer impact across a global portfolio. And for the first time, they can cluster that portfolio and say, okay, I've got 6 different companies that basically have a similar business model in these different contexts. And I can see how they're doing across the metrics that matter with respect to the social impact I want to create. And it's that internal comparison that I think for us was this like, oh, that's the holy grail, right? Because you've been, you're nurturing an investment for 6, 8, 10 plus years. You're living with it every day. You have a thesis, you're getting data, but you actually don't know, okay, these are the 5 things that matter to me with respect to this company and respect to social impact. And you can literally see a ranking across each of those metrics for all of those companies in the portfolio. Like that creates a different set of conversations. And I think it's the other thing is it creates a different set of expectations, because one of the things, like a frog in kind of boiling water, we as impact investors have gotten used to is managing these massive impact portfolios in the absence of impact data. And we're just like, well, that's normal. But needless to say, the moment you have the data, it's not that from one day to the next, everything changes. If everything changed, that would be problematic. But you just have a new set of information around which to build better hypotheses, around which to question some of your assumptions. And to me, just like we have become expert at deploying capital, we actually need, as people are deploying capital, become expert at understanding social impact. And that's only going to happen when we get data and then we do another thing, and we get new data and we do another thing. And that's how we learn. And so I think the real thing that's hamstrung this sector as a whole is we've massively increased the amount of capital we've deployed. We've gotten very used to having pretty crummy social impact data. And we have not been afforded the opportunity to engage in 10, 15, 20 years of learning. Because to be clear, solving the kinds of problems that social entrepreneurs and social impact investors are supporting them to try to solve is really hard, right? And so our metric has basically become, is the business succeeding and is my investment succeeding? Both of which are super important and which will likely correlate with positive social impact. But that's not enough, And so that's, I think, where we can do better.
Do you see, I'm not sure how much visibility you have into that, but do you see how your customers change or maybe question their own investment theses based on the data that you're providing them?
We do. I mean, again, I would say that process, especially at the investor level, takes time.
Yeah.
At the company level, it's easier, right? I mean, we have spotted, huge gaps in literally really simple stuff that you would think, well, you shouldn't be discovering this. Like the guy said the thing wouldn't break, it broke, he didn't come back. But 40% of customers saying that. And those 40% of customers are very poor customers buying a solar home system that they've just shelled out $300 for and the thing breaks. So that's kind of the easy to fix things. We've seen really interesting examples. One of my favorite examples is a Nigerian company that's a processor of cassava. And what we basically found for them was, despite everything they were doing, the transportation costs from the farm to the processing plant was eating up all the potential upside for the farmers, despite all sorts of other positive things going on in that supply chain. And from that data, they accelerated their plans to basically go from one centralized large mill to lots of smaller, more local mini processing mills. And in that step alone, transformed the social impact realized by those farmers. It's a company called Saltree. We've also seen, we've just published today a COVID report. So we reached out to, over the course of last year, more than 50,000 people in more than 30 countries to see what the impacts of COVID were. So we've seen microfinance organizations change their loan forgiveness. We've seen the investors into those microfinance organizations have more flexible terms. So we see lots of those examples. I think over time, we begin to then see, and sometimes our challenge is to hear back from folks like, well, now what are you doing? But I think it has to do with asking a different set of questions, and deploying capital in slightly different ways. And I do think we all have this sort of sense of what are my best performers? And I do think, I heard back a story, but I won't share exactly which fund it was, but from data that we shared in 2017. And like the boss of the boss of the boss of that fund I was talking to a couple of weeks ago said, we still are wondering, like, why is that one that we didn't think was that great? Why was it the best? And I'm like, it's so interesting to me that you're still talking about that, right? And I think it's just that level of like, oh, so when that company, you know, which you thought was kind of the bottom middle of the pack for a set of reasons, if it turns out it's the top of the pack, like, what do you do differently to support it? What do you do differently to make sure that its next round happens? So I think that strategic shifts within an investor are subtle, but when we hear those things coming back, it gives us a lot of optimism.
And it sounds like a lot of the value that you're creating is captured at the individual company level. Is there, and maybe for some of the social entrepreneurs in the audience, is there a way for them to engage with you and capture some of the value directly?
I hope so. So it's interesting you mentioned that. The timing is perfect. So we have traditionally, just because like of the basics of how our business works, we basically have focused our energy on selling to the people deploying capital because we want to sell 10 projects, not one.
Right.
We have to. But we actually just started an initiative this year that we focus on folks that have worked with us before. But if there are people participating in this right now who'd like to get involved, we can try to make that happen, where we're going directly to social enterprises and doing a pretty aggressive discount of our normal pricing because we're trying to get like 50 to 100 of them kind of going direct rather than going through funds. And so folks can follow up with me or Rebecca if that's something that's interesting to them. But yeah, I mean, we've always, obviously anybody can, and folks have called us up and said, hey, I'd just like to hire you. I mean, we're thrilled to have that happen. We're trying to develop a product that has a price point and a speed and kind of an experience that is optimized for companies, because ultimately this is about companies and value to them. So we want to have them as much and driving the process as the investors themselves.
Perfect. And is there, I know we touched on this a little earlier, but I would love to learn just a little more about the individual questionnaires you're doing with the customers. Apart from the PPI, is there a standard set of questions you ask that's maybe specific to the sector of the company, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, increasingly, yes. For us, obviously, it's a question of critical mass, right? And so the sectors in which we've done the most work are off-grid energy, financial inclusion, agriculture, education, you know, and to a certain extent, we've been working also across those themes in the US, although they show up slightly differently. And so what we end up having is not only a core set of questions, but a core set of indicators and social performance benchmarks in each of those sectors. So if you were saying, okay, I've got an off-grid energy company in Uganda, what do I need to measure? We're like, it's these metrics, these are the questions, and if you use these questions, these are the benchmarks of performance. And so what we're trying to make sure happens is that we're not giving people answers in a vacuum. You know, so, you know, what percentage of your customers after they have access to better lighting feel safer? 36%. If I said that to an entrepreneur, I assume that person would say, well, is that good? Right? I mean, it's human nature, right? And so we now know the answer to that. We can say, well, compared to other, I don't know, Kenyan solar companies, your number is this, high, low. The population you're serving is different in this and this in different ways. So we can really make that much more real and much more actionable by putting in that context. So across each of these sectors, we do have standardized questions and standardized metrics. It is quite sector specific. We do have a set of about 10 to 15 questions that are cross-cutting, that are things like, overall, how's your quality of life changed? Has it changed a lot? Has it changed a little? Why has that happened? As well as some of the more traditional customer insights metrics. And we are working towards rolling that up towards a really very standardized way, because what people really want at the end, it sort of depends on how close you are, right? If you're an entrepreneur, you want like the qualitative questions we ask, like, why did the person say that? Because I really want to get it. And we give them that. The further you get away, it's like, can you tell me the rank order of these 20 companies in terms of social impact? And it's like, sort of is the answer. But what we're working towards is a version of that, where we would be able to say, okay, here are the 5 core themes for this sector. Here is how you rank relative to those themes. And then given that, here's how we weight those themes to basically be able to do that. And our feeling is, as long as you can unpack the math and we can make it transparent to you, then we're comfortable doing it. You know, there is obviously some judgment about whether or not first-time access to something is more important than some other thing. And so that's what we're doing more and more. And we can also share, we have some of our benchmark reports that make that clear of how we're doing that.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds like you're striking a very skillful balance between being specific enough to be useful to the entrepreneur and then general enough so that you can get up to a level of comparability.
I hope so. I mean, I guess, that's what we're continually trying to understand, which is there's lots of stakeholders here, but we do see that things that become standards of measurement do find a way to become super accessible to folks, right? So it's just like, whether it's the JD Power rankings, whether it's Morningstar stars, whether it's S&P ratings for better and for worse, or Moody's ratings, or Michelin stars, all of these things, they're subjective, they're complex, but at the end of the day, you can say this is 1 star, this is 3 stars, this is 5 stars. And I just, again, going back to the, like, we have made impact measurement so scary that it scared off everyone. It does feel to us that we have to find a way to bring that accessibility back, but do it in a way that stays true to the complexity of people's lives. So, on some days we feel like we're striking the right balance, and some days not. It's a challenge because, again, you have everything from a super pragmatic, practical entrepreneur who's trying to run her business to an academic who's saying, well, what's the statistical validity and how do you know causality there and all these sorts of things. And we are speaking a little bit to those two worlds. So sometimes we feel like we got the balance quite perfect. And then, sometimes both of those folks are shouting at us saying,
Oh, perfect, thank you. I have just one question left before we open it to audience questions. Just a reminder to please put them in the Q&A function on Zoom. But Sasha, my last question for you is, how do you see 60 decibels evolving? It sounds like you've been very innovative in the space of impact measurement already. And I know you're early in the timeline of 60 decibels as an independent company. But kind of where do you want to go?
Well, I mean, I think we were just hinting at it now, and I saw one of the questions about sort of JD Power ratings. I mean, we want to create an accessible, useful, customer-centric set of standards that anybody can access, that anybody can deploy themselves. And so the way we're doing that is, we are increasingly becoming a software-based company with a kind of, moving towards a SaaS-like product offering. And basically trying to find a way to give people access to all of the infrastructure that we've built. So as we've been talking about, it's an infrastructure of these researchers, it's the infrastructure, you can imagine, I mean, there are days when I think about it, I'm like, golly, how is this really working? Like, we are having conversations with people in hundreds of languages all over the world, turning those multilingual, open-ended and closed-ended responses into structured quantified data that is then comparable. So part of me is like, wow, I can see why no one's kind of done this yet. Obviously we need to look at it. And I think that, one of the challenges is the market, as I more than alluded to, is sort of a little bit comfortable where it is. And so I think this is a question of how do we create that push and pull. But that's where we're really trying to go, is it, access to that infrastructure, more standardization, more comparability. We are, as it turns out, we'll be doing a Series A this year in service of kind of raising the capital to allow that growth to happen. And so it's an exciting time, but oh look, a cat, that's excellent.
Oh, no.
It's a lot of pieces as you described, because this push and pull of standard and custom is actually kind of inherent in everything we're doing. And we really are trying to find that kind of critical mass of saying, these are the things that we're all going to agree on matter if you're doing this kind of intervention. And then I think the value of that approach increases the more people do it. Right? If we can get 100 or 200 or 300 of the same kind of enterprises to agree and execute on the same metrics, then the 301st one, like, that one has to use that set of metrics. And for that person, the choice to use that set of metrics is inherently like 100 times more valuable than it otherwise would have been, because they instantly see how they compare to everybody else. Right. And so that's our belief and how we kind of get to the other side of this and make it, more valuable to everyone.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Very exciting. So I would love to jump right into the audience questions, and I will read out the first one.
Vera, I'd like to, if you don't mind, ask the first question for Sasha. It seems like the funders that you have at this point are mostly foundations or folks that care a lot about impact. Do you work with more commercial funds as well? What do you think about the relevance of what you're collecting for commercial alternative investment or
Yeah, I mean,
VC type funds?
yeah, I mean, I mean, we've done work for Blackstone, we've done work for Leapfrog, which has more than $1 billion invested. We've done work for Generation. So again, I think it's across the board. I think the question is so I actually think there's no difference with respect to relevance. I think the difference is respect to kind of what the LPs for those funds want and expect. And so I guess what I would say is that the more mainstream funds, the act of, a major PE house launching an impact fund is like the finish line, right? They get a lot of praise for that. They get a lot of notice for that. My expectation is that over time, there'll be a recognition that they've had, just like everybody else has been doing this for 10 or 15 or 20 years, is that they actually don't have the measures to understand if they're having any success with respect to social impact. So I think that it more has to do with expectations. I mean, obviously what we do is more appropriate for B2C business models than B2B business models. So if someone's doing an impact thesis that's like basic research, we're not probably going to be the optimal solution to figure out if that basic research matters. But most everything ends up touching customers, and I think it has more to do with kind of expectations. But we're working with everyone across the spectrum.
So since you mentioned Greg Wolf's question, how about we have an answer to him. So his question is, Sasha, I appreciate your 2 insights on limitations of social impact measurement. Is it correct to think of your efforts as similar to J.D. Power's ratings of car companies, focusing on things more akin to quality measurement and subjective experiences, which is great, but is distinct from discussing market value, in the same sense that J.D. Power tells you nothing about the relative value of cars versus groceries versus entertainment?
So, so it's a 2-part answer to that question. Yes, we're very inspired by the J.D. Power model. It just so happens that the ex-president and CEO of J.D. Power is also our board chair. And so we think about that a lot. The way I understand the J.D. Power story is in the 80s, car companies were run by the engineers. And the philosophy was like, what the blank does a customer have to tell me about the quality of my car? And so when we talked to Steve about the shift they were trying to make car companies accountable to customers. And I do think conceptually the idea of we are deploying billions and trillions of dollars of impact capital without a lot of accountability to the end customers who that capital ostensibly is meant to serve, I think is structurally the same. The second half of the question, I guess I would have a different take on it. We do believe that the subjective assessment by a person of their own lived experience is valid. Now, it's also subjective. We all know this incredibly red group of people that we misassess our own well-being in like 1,000 different ways. But I guess for us, that is not, that doesn't trouble me as much. Like I still believe that if I can ask an objective question to a person about their sense of empowerment, about whether or not they have savings, about whether or not when COVID happened, they're eating less or not, I can very objectively understand certain elements of their lived experience that are relevant and that are impact. So I guess I would differ. I didn't fully understand the quality of cars versus groceries point. I guess what J.D. Power was trying to do is say, this is what the best car is based on this set of criteria. And what we're trying to be able to say is, this is what the best financial inclusion product is in terms of building financial resilience. Whether or not that will ever fully compare to is a financial services intervention better or worse than a lighting intervention, I think we don't know yet. And I guess my answer would be, I think it might be okay if the answer to that is no. But I don't know, I'm not sure if I captured the second half of his question.
Thank you for that. Vera, you want to ask the next question?
I would love to. So Sasha, we got a question from Erica Desmond on your methodology. So do you see 60 decibels evolving to use other communication tools in the future, such as social media platforms, Facebook Marketplace, WhatsApp, Instagram, etc.?
I mean, in principle, yes. I mean, again, we sort of live in the world of people who are currently mostly offline. So we're trying to keep, I mean, to be clear, we do email surveys and we do SMS and we do IVR, which is kind of voice response. So we are not, you know, we're not against doing things that are frankly a lot easier than calling people on the phone. So I think we're, you know, we really have to think about, we haven't done enough, I would say, for example, in like participatory population surveys that I can imagine doing on various websites. To really understand what the differences are. So I guess I would say, you know, I don't want to conjecture too much and waste people's time, but philosophically, we're absolutely, you know, open to it. Again, it tends not to overlap as much with the populations. And we tend to work with people who are focusing on like the 5 billion of the 7 billion people on the planet who are least well off and least well connected. But obviously in a decade, they will all have smartphones with broadband access. So we'll have to keep evolving.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Let me read the next question. This is from one Fernando Libera. In addition to measure the direct impact on impact project clients, do you also measure impacts on natural resources, climate, or national social ecosystems?
Right now, we don't. We're really quite focused on the direct impacts. Not because we don't think the indirect impacts are hugely important, but more we just see this giant gap in this particular space. And so we're trying to create as much value in that space. But we would always be open to partners who can help us learn more about how to do, you know, those levels out.
Great. Vera?
We got a question from Masrura Oishi that I love. What is your take on measuring complex, certain, and slow return models like EdTech, especially in emerging markets, low tech, high touch models?
Can you broke up for a half a second?
Oh, sorry.
I understand the question. So it's sort of slow versus fast impact, is that right?
I know. What is your take on measuring complex, uncertain, and slow return models like EdTech? So an deployment that is maybe not as direct of, oh, I sold you a solar panel and how did it change your life? But we're starting an EdTech solution. The return of the impact there is a lot slower. How do you think about those?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is, you know, we start, I mean, obviously in the various verticals, we've done a lot of work. We do come into a conversation with a client and say, look, we think that these are probably the measures that might matter to you. You know, if I thought of, you know, all the ed tech work that we've done, whether it's schooling or training, you know, the discovery process we go through with our clients is to say, like, ultimately, like, what is the change you think is going to happen here? And just listening to people describe it in really specific ways. You know, I want people to have more access to jobs. I want people to be more confident. I want, you know, and we try to, or sort of schooling, and we try to translate that into measures, and we kind of go back and forth. And we say, so it would be this and this and this. So I think the complexity is going to play out in, you know, things that are platforms, for example. Those conversations can go in lots of different directions. And we may, in narrowing towards the thing that is most readily measurable, miss out on some of those, you know, miss out on a bunch of things. So, you know, I guess what I would say is we have to strike that right balance. At the same time, where I get a little bit skeptical is I have, you know, in my time at Acumen, and I've seen clients sort of say things like, I mean, the best example I have is an investment in a rice farm that we had done many years ago in Acumen. I was like, well, what's the change that's going to happen? And the things were everything from more income for outgrower farmers to we will change how Ghana goes from an importer of rice to an exporter of rice, and there'll be more food security nationally. Like, and there were kind of 6 different levels of change, and it kind of always felt to me like we don't know which one, but like if you throw all of these together, like, is something good hopefully going to happen if this investment succeeds? And the answer was yes. Like, absolutely. If any of those 6 things happen, like, it's a great way to deploy $1.5 million and take a bunch of risk. But I do think it's a little bit of a punt also to just be like, but I'm not willing to say which of these I want to be accountable for. So I guess in the context of that complexity, there is often some work to do to say, that's fine, it's complex, it could be all of these things, but the emergent, just like any good hypothesis generation when you're running a business, right? The things we want to see first are this, and we believe if this happens, it'll lead to this. And if you're getting data in a constant way, and our hope is that we become almost like a market intelligence arm for these firms and for these investors, that it's like, okay, well, hypothesis number 1 is this, and so we're going to measure and see if that's happening. If that's happening, we think this next thing happens, we'll measure again. So it's not this deep breath exercise of like, did we do it or did we not do it? But rather it's just a flow of data that is allowing you to test your various hypotheses. So I hope I captured that question.
That was a very thoughtful answer. Also to help the business in the meantime of if we want to affect change on a national scale, these are the individual steps we need to get there. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
I'll take this opportunity to do a follow-up question, Sasha, about what I asked before, which is how commercial funds, whether or not they use your data. So you gave us some example of large funds that have worked with you. So then how do they use that data? Is it just for marketing purposes? Or I guess I understand from foundations, because they work pretty closely with the companies that they invest in. How about those large organizations that are commercially focused?
I guess I would say, Siri, I don't see a distinction in how they use it that is mostly driven by like, are they more commercial or are they less commercial? I guess, so I'm sort of curious of the premise behind the question, because another way, what's underneath, I think the question, or at least what I'm hearing in it, is for a more commercial impact investor, the binding constraint is the commercial return and the upside is the impact. And, I do think that, I don't know, I guess, when I talk to someone who's deploying capital in that context, a question I will often ask is, you're going to put in 10 to 20 million in this company. How much would you be, would, for example, and we see this happening on a small scale all the time, if you could spend a few $1,000, $10,000, $15,000 to discover whether or not, in fact, at day 1, this even aligns with your impact thesis, like what's the return on that, for the 10 or 15 or 20 million you didn't deploy chasing impact that didn't exist? And again, I think that the reality is, for at least what I see in the marketplace, is for some of the more commercial funds, the impact is really serious and baked in. And for some of the more commercial funds, it's sort of like, there's 50 deals I was going to do, 10 of them actually, it turns out, might be good for the world. So I'm going to put them in this other bucket over here. And it's great if they succeed, but there's not a sense of like, my capital is scarce and my capital's job is to create a certain amount of impact. So I do think the reality is that different investors are still optimizing for different things. But my experience watching the folks that we've worked with is, because our focus is helping you get more intelligence that will help learning happen, that will help the company succeed more, that divergence of like, I'm a super for-profit PE investor versus I'm a concessionary foundation funded investor. Both of those folks typically care about the company's success, the ability to meet customer needs, and therefore ability to grow. So I don't see that distinction as big, but I do think that there are some folks for whom, again, like the level of specificity we're able to give them on whether or not the impact is being created is just beyond what they really think their remit is. And then we're not a good fit for them.
I guess the reason I asked was because for foundations, usually they report up to those that are executives or whoever the foundation top people are. So there is, the reporting can be more complex, which is what you're providing, more data on, different aspects of impact. But if you are a large fund, the people that you report to are the LPs, who may not be able to absorb that level of detailed information. And I don't know, and it's after the fact in terms of investing. So
Yeah,
how
again,
do you?
I guess what we've seen is it does depend on the LPs, but I think the LPs are a heterogeneous group. You've got pension funds who are incredibly forward-looking in terms of carbon and climate change. Obviously, you have family offices and younger investors who have a different set of expectations. So to me, what you hit on is really the answer. It's about not creating so much complexity that this becomes then kind of a specialist exercise again, but rather being able to provide clear and transparent metrics just that an LP would be able to understand, an LP would be able to react to. But I think there's going to come a moment where, for example, you've got whatever it is, 80 or 100 funds that have signed up to the IFC principles around here. I can't remember what it's called, responsible investing, et cetera. And there's the first 8 are basically around process, and the 9th one is around like, are you actually doing it, and do you have good data? And I think the natural evolution of things is everybody's excited and is signing up, and people are focused on the first 8 of the principles, and then there's a 9th principle. It's like, oh well, that in the beginning is optional, but over time, I think expectations will continue to evolve. And so I think our job is to avoid falling into the trap of it's so complex that you have to be an expert. But I think that the expectations on day one and the expectations 5 years in, they're going to be people say, okay, well, you just deployed $100 billion. You can't show me the impact, and you called yourself an impact fund. Like, I think that will come back to bite people. And the folks that get ahead of that and can provide real data are going to be the folks who raise the next fund, and the folks for whom the LPs don't care. Maybe, I think it'll be a safe place for a while, but I don't think it's a static market with a static set of expectations. And we've already seen, if you look at what people are doing now versus 10 years ago, they would have said, you got to be kidding me. I went to a Christmas party way back before COVID, and I have a friend who works in like the most old school investment house in New York. And he pulled me aside. He's like, this thing you're doing, like, everyone's talking about this environment stuff. Like, what's going on? Like, and he was the first person to be like he's personally a great person, but his firm, that's not what they care about, and it's come knocking on his door. So again, I just think that we have to, I think we have to think a little bit more in 10-year cycles and where are we going to be, and be building for that rather than thinking kind of where we are today is static, because I really think that expectations have changed.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for me as well, as a person working for a VC fund that's a signatory of the UN Principles of Responsible Investment. Yeah, how that measurement is actually done is, I think about it constantly. It's certainly not an optimized process so far.
That's fine. Neither was accounting when it started.
Yeah. I wanted to read out the audience question from Ron Bates, who asks, can you give us an example of how the entrepreneur makes a monetary return on investment? I'm assuming from you working with them, an example of how that affected the entrepreneur's business.
I mentioned it in passing just as a super concrete example of, again, I guess what I would say is what we see as a practical matter is, again, we are doing questions. I think of this Venn diagram of like traditional customer insights, customer level social impact, and like how, I think it's more overlap than not. So that's just kind of the picture that I have in my mind. Right. But, that said, we have examples. So super concretely, we do see that there is a type of firm for whom these results are prerequisite to their next round of investment capital. So we have, this is a company called Sun Culture that just raised something like $25 million, and our findings from the study is shared in their annual letter, which is clear, and we understand that it was part of their fundraise, right? So I think this expectation of, for a certain class of investor, for a certain size of company, to be able to show that you take this seriously and that you are a top performer, is just going to move your head and make you more attractive from an investment perspective. But in addition to that, what we see operationally is there's a lot of kind of meat and potatoes customer feedback that we're getting folks. And that is the easiest thing to act on, right? So for example, just two categories. One is, are problems resolved for your customers? You know, when you see, you know, do you have challenges with the product and are problems resolved? Like those are the things that people are acting on first. That's a lot easier to act on than, I thought I was serving this entire segment of the population, but it turns out that I'm not. I thought I was serving the poorest people, but I'm not. That latter question is a lot more difficult question to solve for a whole bunch of obvious reasons. So at a practical level, I mean, we have hundreds of examples of people saying, I heard that, you know, I learned that this message wasn't landing. I learned that this, I learned that that. I think we have other examples that may or may not be more commercial around, you know, how the product is being used and is it making your life better? You know, it is, I would say it's a little bit, you know, I don't have the perfect crisp story, but what I guess I would say is what we hear time and time again is like, ultimately you're asking, how relevant is this product towards making your life better? And, you know, if you go back, you know, we use Net Promoter Score in basically all of our surveys, and the Net Promoter Score concept behind that question is like, how passionately do you love this product? Do you love this product enough to tell someone about it and say, you've got to buy it, right? We see example after example, like that depth of impact going from low to transformative is going to correlate with, yeah, this product was nice and I wanted to get it, to like, this product has been transformative. I've got to tell people about it. You know, so I think it is, you know, a more evolved entrepreneur who's going to see that connection. But again, because we're talking at that customer level about their individual experience with the product, you know, I would sort of ask someone to disprove the thesis. If you can get someone to transformational impact for a thing that you're delivering, are they not going to be more loyal, higher share of wallet, and more likely to refer you to the next person? Like that's what we're seeing. That said, there are entrepreneurs who are data focused and customer focused, and there are entrepreneurs who are not. And we don't come in and transform that. But for the ones who are in that former category, I think they're just like digging into the data. And again, we're giving them the quantitative data, but we're also, because going back to our infrastructure, we have these researchers, we're giving them, you know, loads of qualitative responses. Why did you say that? What's your experience? What do you like? So, you know, we can tell those entrepreneurs right away that are like, that's great. The report looks awesome. I need the raw data, because I want to see those open-ended responses that I understand why my customers are saying what they're saying. And so that's where the ROI comes for them.
And then the qualitative responses would be direct quotes from the customer.
That's right.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is from Satish Sharakumali. I hope I pronounced that okay. So he says, Sasha, thank you for your insights. How do you deal with the accuracy of data if you have to rely on government data? Our solution helps in control of mosquito-borne diseases. Follow-up question, which parameters should we consider in mosquito-borne disease space?
So on the first one, I don't know how to answer because we're not relying on external data sources. We are gathering new data directly from customers. And then on the second, my knowledge of mosquito nets and controlling malaria is literally 10 years old. So I don't think I should, I mean, we haven't done S60 decibels work in that space. So I think I should let that one go.
Okay. Vera?
Yep. I wanted to read out a question from Rekha Pai, who asks, how do you see investments catering toward needs of lower middle income population versus truly bottom of the pyramid population and the additionality of impact? How does that factor in how you treat impact measurement?
I mean, it's a great question, and there's a lot of layers to it. We are always trying to first and foremost understand the profile of customers, because again, I think that that's going to be one of the major differentiators. One has to, I think, decide almost from a values perspective what one thinks. What I mean by that is like, we're not going to be in the business of saying like we will say objectively you're serving more marginalized populations. Objectively, you're giving people first-time access. And we are much more confident around additionality in those two cases. We talk a lot internally about whether or not it's our job to therefore say that is more impact, particularly on serving, you know, more marginalized populations or not. I guess I will say though that we do see the self-reported difference in impact be greater. What I mean by that is, If I ask the same set of questions to emerging middle-class customers, to poorer customers, and ask them to subjectively assess for a similar kind of product, how much their lives have changed, it is mostly the case that for the most, what you would expect would happen. For the people who didn't have access to that product, for the people who are most marginalized, their experience of it is it has the largest impact on both subjective and objective measures. So I think it does come out. Obviously, the other underlying question is, if I can build a stronger and more sustainable business serving a broader, more middle-class set of the population, can I ultimately create more impact versus being exclusively focused on more marginalized populations? And we have some interesting data on that. I think the answer is, it kind of depends. That said, I would say, except for some kinds of products, it is difficult for folks, like to say like I'm going to get to the more marginalized populations in the future can be like starting a diet tomorrow. We may never get there. So I think that's just the one cautionary tale I would keep in mind.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. Sayuri? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. The next question is this one from Greg again. We may, I think this is just a comment. Sorry about that. Okay, so next question is, have you worked with inner city missions whose job is transforming change in individuals and where there's often not a product at the point of contact?
Sure, some, and we're actually just starting a major piece of work in the US with a large foundation that is doing a lot of that kind of work. There absolutely doesn't need to be a product. It can be a service, it can be a community membership. And again, this kind of gets to this question, well, there's two things. One is trust, right? It's really important for us to be able to build trust with that constituency and make sure that they have a positive experience of interacting with our team. So we're very cognizant of that in this set of projects, and we can sort of let you know in a few months how it goes. But secondly, it gets to this question of kind of subjective assessment, right? At the end of the day, someone in these contexts will more often than not be talking about how they're feeling, about how connected they're feeling, about their sense of optimism, their sense of being targeted in various ways. And so that is where really we do kind of firmly stand with the idea of we're going to listen to what people say and believe it, as long as we can ask it objectively. So I guess what I would say, the third thing is, and I guess I hinted it in the beginning, which is whether it's in the context you just described or in some other topic area. So we've done a lot of work in gender, and actually originally, while we were with Acumen, did work with Acumen and Unilever on gender-based metrics, which are also pretty underdeveloped. And there are a certain set of questions that the context in which we're asking them makes it difficult, more sensitive questions. Where we don't know the context. For example, we're talking to a woman about how safe she feels in her house or with her husband, et cetera, where if we can't physically assure, for example, that person's safety and privacy when they're talking to us, let alone some of the trusts that we need to build up, there may just be a limit to what kinds of conversations we can have, ensuring the positive experience for those end customers. So we've done some interesting things. We actually did a piece of work last year that was just fascinating with garment workers in India. Women who did not have access to a phone and kind of were not allowed formally to kind of speak to us, but the organization that was working to empower these women was really very proactive about it. And we found this like crazy way to like send them phones and get approval from their 4 people and on a break, like share the phone and have the conversations. And it was like, our team was sort of teary-eyed with what we were hearing, good and bad, but also just the fact that we were able, their just appreciation for actually literally being given voice. And I think that's another thing that, I think is an important thing to end on. I think when we do our job the best, the act of calling someone and giving them voice and listening to them and making that voice be heard is inherently an act of empowerment. I won't claim that every single day we are hitting that bar fully, but I think it's important not to lose sight of that, because everywhere in the environments that we're working in, there's such powerful power dynamics at play. And our hopes is that on our best days, we're even in just the act of saying, I care what you have to say, and I want to hear it. And I'm going to share it with these other folks in a genuine way, verbatim. we hope is in and of itself, a positive interaction.
Thank you
That's
so
amazing.
much, Sasha. We are out of time. We still have more questions. Unfortunately, we will not be able to get to them today.
I can
Vera,
mention, if there are follow-up questions, our emails are super easy. I'm Sasha at 60 decibels. My colleague Rebecca is Rebecca at 60decibels.com. So if there's specific things, obviously you can send them to Sayuri or Vera, or reach out to us if we can be helpful.
Thank you for that offer. It's so generous. Vera, do you have some last comments you want to make before we leave?
I just wanted to thank Sasha for his time, your insights. This was amazingly educational. Thank you for sharing with us.
It's a pleasure to get to talk to you guys. Thank you all for the questions. I know that there are other human beings besides the ones I can see. So you know how busy everyone is. So thanks for your curiosity and for joining us. And hopefully we can find a way to stay connected.
Yeah.
Thank you all for attending.
Bye, Sasha.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.